our panel discussion with Paul Fenewald. He's Special Advisor for the Missouri Center for Education Safety. Also, we have Dr. Jim Simpson, Superintendent of Lindbergh Schools, Melissa Randall, Executive Director, Missouri School Boards Association, and Brett Gann, Chief of Staff, Missouri School Boards Association. Let's start with school safety. And for folks who've been in this education business for a while, I would think, is it the last 10 years where this has sort of gone up the totem pole? Is it higher now than it's ever been?
Yes, I think it is. It's moving in that direction. If you look at the trajectory of attention being paid to school safety, because it's being driven by things that are happening and then the coverage of it. Maybe it wasn't as well publicized 20, 30 years ago if we had somebody that would bring a gun into school and threaten to do something violent, and now it's all over the evening news. And so there's a lot of attention being paid, but I think also just the complexity of school safety is getting more and more complicated. Things like social media that can be misused to do bullying and things like that. Threats, terrorist threats, groups like ISIS that we've never heard of before. Radicalization of our youth, both by the extreme right and the extreme left, those sorts of things. There's all these things out there that are coming to people's attention, and things that schools aren't immune being influenced by that.
How do you, as administrators, want to be proactive without panicking and making people nervous, but yet saying this is important, but not freaking people out, with that not being a real technical term, I guess?
I think it's a great term. There's a lot of emotion in this. Every time you have a lockdown in a school, the students are putting out their cell phones, they're putting their spin to it, their parents are getting those spins. There's some people freaking out. That's a good point. And yet it could be just a routine lockdown because the police are chasing somebody running through the neighborhood, which is a common one in St. Louis County for lockdowns. So yes, you got this incredible emotion. You got this incredible thing you have to deal with every time there's a school shooting on the national stage. It's a horrible thing, but I know the